Hi everyone, today I'm going to show you how to make a clay animal. And if you want to make an animal that has 4 legs, this video is for you. To make this animal we will use the slab and pinch methods. And before we start, we need to get all of our materials ready. Of course you need clay, a chunk smaller than your fist is good. You need a needle tool and a ruler for cutting straight lines in the clay, a wire brush, make sure it's clean. You need mud, which is basically a mixture of clay with water. Make sure it's not too wet. It's called mud, so make sure it feels more like mud than just dirty water. You need carving tools for when you want to add details to your animal. And when it's time to color your animal, you need a brush and glaze or acrylic paint, depending on what you choose. I'll talk about that later. So we're going to use the clay press to make the clay flat. Good thickness is a little less than 1 centimeter. So use those 2 rulers, place them on one side of the cloth and tighten the screw, and then do the same with the other side. Put the clay on the slab, flatten it just a bit so you can roll it easier. Make sure the cloth is spread out evenly on both sides, and then turn the wheel to flatten the clay. Roll it away and you have a flat slab of clay. So now we're going to cut a rectangle out of it. This will be your animal's body and legs. Use the needle tool and the ruler to make the shape more like a rectangle. So generally the length should be a little longer than the width, just like that. We have all this leftover clay from cutting the rectangle, but don't throw it away. We'll use this later to make the head and tail. Like I said before, this rectangle will become your animal's body and legs. Start by taking the long ends of the rectangle and bending them together. Pinch them together so it doesn't unfold, but don't pinch it all the way. Just make the pinching place 2 fingers thick in the middle. So once you're done with that, you're also going to bring the short ends into the middle. Just like with the long ends, only pinch in the middle parts. You'll see, pinching them into the center, just like that. When you're done, you should have 4 corners, kind of like flower petals. They're the flower petals. And now you have the basic shape. If you turn it over, it kind of looks like a body with 4 legs. See? Now we're going to pinch the corners to give the legs more shape. And generally, make them look like cylinders. But for this step, don't follow my instructions exactly. Now for this animal, I'm going to make a horse, so I want longer legs. But if you're making a different animal, make the legs look like those of the animal you want to make. So it'll depend on what animal you want to make. Now the only thing I recommend is to make all of your legs the same length so that your animal doesn't wobble when you put it on the table. And also, don't make the legs too thin, otherwise your animal's legs could break. So remember all that extra clay that we set aside? We're going to use that to make the head and the tail now. Again, there's no right way to make this since it depends on the animal you're making. So take a large chunk to make the head and the neck, and a smaller chunk to make the tail. And now I'm going to make my horse's head and neck, and one of the characteristics is the long neck. I need to make sure it's not too thin, otherwise it'll just break off. And now I'm going to add details like the nose and the eyes and the ears now, because it'll be harder to do it when it's stuck onto the body. So here I am carving out the eye holes. There's my finished head. So now I'm going to use that small chunk of clay to make the tail, and it's a tail, there's not much to it. Now the only thing is, now that we're going to connect it to the body, we want a nice, wide, flat part, so that there's a lot of clay that's connecting the tail to the body, like that. Once you're satisfied with how your head and your tail look, you're going to attach them to the body. We're going to use the score and slip method using the wire brush. So first take the place where the neck is going to attach to the body and scratch it up with the wire brush. Don't be afraid to scratch it in deep, and don't worry if this looks kind of ugly, because you won't see it once you attach it to the body. So once you're done scratching it up, hold it onto the body to see the area on the body that you need to scratch. So over there, and then take the wire brush and just scratch it up a bunch on both sides of the connection. So whenever you glue 2 things together, you always put glue on both sides. It's the same with welding. We always put the mud on both sides of the clay that we're going to connect. So spread the mud on both this part of the neck and the part on the body where it's going to attach. And finally, press the two together. Now make sure you press it down hard because this is your last chance to stick them together. Once the clay is fired, it will be very hard, and then you won't be able to use mud to weld it together again. And now I'm just going to finish by making some adjustments, adding some clay around the neck and to the neck just to make it stronger. And that's the head done. Now you're going to do everything that you did before except with the tail. So here's the scratching, and now you add the mud, and finally attach them. And that's the welding part done. Now we're going to add patterns or details to make your animal look nice before we fire it. This is the last step before you fire it, so do all the decorations that you want now, because you won't have much of a chance after it's fired. So start with the connections that we just made with the head and the tail. Run the edges over them so that they look a little smoother, so it looks more natural and part of the animal's body. You don't want to see seams or anything. So I'm just doing the same thing with the head right now, and it looks a little smoother. Once you're done with that, you can shape the feet. Now I want my horse to have hooves, so I'm pinching just above the feet to kind of make it thin in the middle before it becomes the hoof. So yeah, I'm going to do that with all 4 of my horse's feet. But hey, this is my animal, and yeah, just make your animal's feet what they're supposed to look like. Another thing you might want to do is, if you look closely at the skin, you can see some cracks or a cloth pattern that's left over from when you made the slab of clay. You can get rid of that by just using a little bit of the mud or some water, just to rub it on the surface and just get rid of the cloth pattern. So now your animal's skin is a lot smoother. And another thing I'm going to do just to make my animal more realistic is to carve some hooves. Because yeah, there's like a bit of a scratch or something. Kind of a part where the horse's hoof has a chip, I guess. I don't know what to call that. Anyway, I'm hoping that looks a little more realistic, so I'm just going to do that to all of the feet. So here I'm just going to change the shape of its back by pressing on it a bit. And once you're done decorating, just carve your name on the bottom. Now that your animal is done, you need to let it air dry. Just let it sit for about a week or so to make sure all the water in the clay dries out. Then you put it in the kiln to bisque fire it. When your animal is in the kiln, it will be heated to a very high temperature and it will become hard. And take your animal out of the kiln and it will be harder and it will have a different color. Now your animal probably looks great now, but it only has one color, so now you get to add that color. There are 2 ways of doing that. One thing you can do is use acrylic paint to color your animal. Now this is a bit easier because, well, it's just paint. With glaze you need to fire it again, but with paint it's okay because yeah, you can just paint it right on and you don't have to fire it again. The only difference is that it is not shiny and it also feels rough, whereas glaze makes your animal feel a little more smooth. Another thing you can do for color is glaze. Now this works a lot like regular paint, except you need to fire it again and afterwards it'll change color. So when you want to see the final color, look at these samples that Mrs. Newkirk has. Also, don't paint the glaze on the bottom, otherwise it'll just stick to the floor of the kiln. If you chose to use glaze to color your animal, you'll have to wait for the glaze to dry and then put it in the kiln again for a glaze fire. And your animal is finally finished. So as you look at what you've just created, think, what do you like about your animal and what do you think you could do better next time? Thank you for watching. I hope you had fun and I hope you learned a lot.